"Help me!" The scream ripped through the canyon just as a wheelchair tipped over the edge of a cliff. Avery Johnson never stood a chance, disabled, isolated, and targeted for months because of who she was. What began as school bullying turned into something far darker, something no one expected teenagers to be capable of. As her body disappeared into the void below, the forest fell silent until the roar of engines shattered everything. Who were the men who heard her screams, and why would they risk everything to save her? And what truth was Avery never meant to survive? Comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And subscribe for more powerful stories that demand to be heard. Avery Johnson's days followed a quiet, predictable rhythm, one shaped by survival rather than choice. Every morning, she rolled her wheelchair through the long halls of Oak Creek High, past lockers scarred with years of neglect and banners celebrating victories that never seemed meant for someone like her. She was 16, black, disabled, and painfully aware that those three facts alone made her visible in all the wrong ways. At home, life wasn't easier, just quieter. Her mother, Vivian Johnson, worked exhausting shifts as a nurse at the county hospital, leaving before sunrise and returning long after dark. The house carried the weight of loss. Avery's father, Samuel Johnson, had died 2 years earlier in what the town called a work accident at the quarry. People stopped asking questions quickly in Oak Creek. Some truths were too expensive to chase. At school, Avery learned to keep her head down. She ate lunch near the exits. She memorized which hallways were safest. Still, it never stopped the whispers, the snickers, or the deliberate bumps meant to remind her where she stood. Grant Sterling and Harlon Brooks made sure of that. Sons of privilege wrapped in varsity jackets and immunity, they treated cruelty like entertainment. Teachers noticed. They always did. But noticing was where it ended. "Just ignore them," someone once muttered as Avery wiped food from her lap in a bathroom stall. She tried. She always tried. What no one saw was how closely Avery paid attention, how she listened, how she remembered things people assumed she was too weak to carry. Her father had taught her that. Pay attention, Avery. Truth hides in plain sight. As days passed, the tension around her tightened like a wire pulled too far. Threats became casual, smiles became warnings, and somewhere beneath the surface of Oak Creek, beneath the school, the quarry, the quiet streets, something rotten waited to break through. Avery didn't know it yet, but the cruelty aimed at her wasn't random anymore. It was deliberate, planned, and soon it would follow her far beyond the school halls, into a place where silence could kill and survival would depend on being heard. The pressure around Avery Johnson didn't explode all at once. It crept in day by day, tightening its grip until there was nowhere left to breathe. At Oak Creek High, cruelty had become routine, almost procedural. Grant Sterling and Harlon Brooks no longer bothered to hide what they did. They didn't have to. Their laughter echoed through hallways like a warning siren, and wherever it landed, Avery knew trouble followed. It started small, then sharpened. Trays dumped into her lap, wheels kicked as she passed, phones lifted just long enough to capture humiliation before disappearing again. Teachers looked up, looked away, and continued their lessons as if silence itself were policy. Avery learned that pain was loud, but accountability was quiet in Oak Creek. One afternoon, she was ordered to clean back hallways as community service, a punishment disguised as kindness. Alone, pushing a mop through dim corridors, she passed the boys' locker room. That was when she heard her father's name spoken like a joke. She slowed without realizing it, heart pounding as voices carried through the cracked door. Grant's voice was calm, careless. He spoke about Samuel Johnson the way people talked about trash, something to be disposed of quietly. Harlon laughed, nervous, repeating words that didn't sound rehearsed, only borrowed. Then came the confession, not shouted, not dramatic. Just truth spoken when they believed no one important was listening. A quarry, a notebook, a problem solved. Avery's hands shook so badly the mop slipped from her grip and clattered across the floor. Silence followed. Heavy footsteps moved toward the door. Panic took over. She turned her wheelchair, wheels catching, heart racing as she fled down the hall. She didn't stop until she reached a stairwell, breath ragged, the truth crashing into her all at once. Her father hadn't died in an accident. From that moment on, everything changed. Threats stopped pretending to be jokes. Messages appeared on her phone from unknown numbers. "You heard too much. You won't get another chance." At home, Vivian noticed the fear but not the cause. Avery tried to speak, then swallowed the words. Fear told her that telling the truth too soon could be fatal. The school announced a mandatory class trip to Eagle Ridge, a place locals whispered about but never challenged. A cliffside trail, open air, No cell service. When Avery saw Grant smiling at the sign-up sheet, something in her chest tightened. She packed her bag carefully that morning, hiding a small canister of pepper spray beneath her jacket, not bravery but instinct guiding her hands. At the trailhead, teachers rushed students forward, eager to finish roll calls and disappear into their routines. Grant and Harlan hung back, blocking Avery's path with practiced ease. Their voices were light, almost friendly, but their eyes weren't. Money changed hands nearby. Heads turned away. No one asked questions. They steered her off the main trail and into silence. The forest swallowed sound as trees thickened and the ground turned uneven. Avery tried to slow her chair, digging her palms into the wheels, but hands shoved harder. Her phone was ripped away, smashed against a rock without hesitation. The last fragile line to safety vanished in seconds. At the edge of Eagle Ridge, the world opened into a violent drop. Wind screamed upward from the canyon below. Grant's grip tightened behind her chair, his voice close, low, deliberate. He spoke about her father again, about mistakes, about endings. Avery felt time fracture. Fear burned through her, but instinct survived. She reached inside her jacket and sprayed blindly. Chaos erupted. Harlan screamed, stumbling back. For a heartbeat, hope flared. Then Grant moved. The kick came fast, brutal, final. As Avery and her wheelchair tipped forward, gravity claimed her. Her scream tore through the canyon, raw and desperate, echoing off ancient stone. The world fell away beneath her, and for one terrible moment it seemed certain that Oak Creek would finally get what it wanted. Silence. Then from somewhere deep in the forest, a sound answered back. Not a voice, not footsteps. Engines. Avery's scream didn't fade the way Grant expected. It didn't vanish into the canyon like everything else in Oak Creek that people wanted forgotten. It echoed, sharp, raw, alive, bouncing off stone and trees, ripping through the quiet forest. And then came the sound that changed everything. Engines, deep, loud, unmistakable. Grant froze. Harlan, half-blinded and panicking, staggered backward, hands clawing at his face. The roar grew closer, tearing through the trees like a warning the forest itself had decided to deliver. Two motorcycles burst from the brush, dirt spraying, leather jackets flashing in the sunlight. Hell's Angels. Frank moved first. He didn't think he reacted. His boots hit the ground as he ran, muscles burning, eyes locked on the cliff's edge. For a split second, Avery's wheelchair disappeared from sight, swallowed by the drop. Grant stepped back, breath coming fast, a smile flickering across his face as if he believed it was already over. It wasn't. Avery's hand caught a gnarled root jutting from the cliff face. Pain ripped through her shoulder as her body jerked to a violent stop. She dangled in open air, legs swinging above nothing, fingers screaming as bark tore into her skin. The world narrowed to breath, pain, and the desperate command repeating in her head, "Don't let go." Frank hit the ground at the edge, sliding on loose gravel. His hand shot out, fingers brushing cold metal, then skin. For one heartbeat, he had her. Then the wheelchair tore free, spinning into the canyon, crashing into silence below. Avery screamed again, terror and defiance tangled together, her grip slipping. Behind Frank, Big Mike stepped forward, blocking the path back into the forest like a wall made of muscle and consequence. Grant turned to run, and didn't get far. Frank spun, rage pouring out of him, and grabbed Grant's arm, twisting hard. Bone popped. Grant's scream was ugly, stripped of all power. "You don't get to walk away," Frank growled. Harlan dropped to his knees, shaking, the reality finally crashing down. "We didn't mean—" The words fell apart before they could finish. There was no meaning left to hide behind. Frank turned back to the edge. Avery's fingers were bleeding now, strength fading. Her vision blurred, the canyon pulling at her like gravity itself had a voice. She heard Frank shouting her name, felt hands reaching, but fear told her she was running out of time. Then another voice cut through it all. Vivian. Frank had already called. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, but help was still minutes away, minutes Avery didn't have. Frank wrapped a rope around his waist, anchored himself without hesitation, and leaned over the edge. "Look at me," he shouted. "I've got you, you're not alone." Avery's grip slipped, the root cracked, she let go. Frank caught her wrist, the force nearly pulling him over with her. Big Mike lunged forward, anchoring him, boots digging into dirt. Inch by inch, they hauled Avery up, muscles shaking, breath tearing out of them. When she finally collapsed onto solid ground, the forest seemed to exhale. Avery sobbed. Vivian crashed through the trees moments later, dropping to her knees, pulling her daughter into her arms. Around them, phones were raised. Engines idled. Witnesses stood frozen. Grant lay on the ground, broken and exposed, staring at the girl he tried to erase. And for the first time in Oak Creek, the truth wasn't falling into silence. It was climbing back up. Avery Johnson left Eagle Ridge alive, but she did not leave unchanged. Survival came with a cost, bruises on her body, fear etched deep into her memory, and a truth too heavy to carry quietly anymore. What happened on that cliff could no longer be buried under privilege, silence, or excuses. There were witnesses now. Phones were recording, and for the first time in Oak Creek, the story did not belong to those with power. Grant Sterling was taken away screaming, stripped of the confidence that had protected him for years. Harlon Brooks, shaking and broken, finally faced the weight of what he had helped create. The names that once ruled the town no longer felt untouchable. Avery's father, Samuel Johnson, was no longer dismissed as an unfortunate accident. His truth, once ignored, began to surface piece by piece, carried by a daughter who refused to disappear. Vivian Johnson stood beside Avery through hospital lights and police questions, her fear turning into resolve. She watched her daughter speak when others had stayed silent, and she understood something Oak Creek had forgotten long ago. Survival is not weakness, it is resistance. Avery's voice, trembling but unbroken, traveled farther than the canyon ever could. It reached people who had once looked away and forced them to look again. What happened to Avery was not just about bullying. It was about how easily cruelty grows when systems protect the wrong people. It was about how race, disability, and power collide, and who pays the price when no one intervenes. Oak Creek was forced to confront a truth it had avoided for years. Silence is not neutral. It always chooses a side. Avery returned home knowing the world had not magically changed, but something had shifted. People whispered differently now, they watched more closely, and for the first time she was not invisible. Her survival became a mirror, reflecting a reality many prefer not to see, but one that exists far beyond a single town or a single cliff. This story is not rare. It is repeated in hallways, neighborhoods, and systems across the country. The only difference is who gets heard and who is pushed to the edge. The question is not whether injustice still exists. The question is how many more screams will it take before we listen. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Black Community Struggles for more powerful stories about justice, truth, and our community's fight to be seen. And don't forget to hit the like button. Your support helps these stories reach the people who need them most.